40 years on, we look at the year 1973. And I'd say a uniquely Welsh symbol of that time is the bilingual sign on the roads and elsewhere. Controversial then, of course, but today I think a symbol of distinctiveness, dignity and fair play, and part of the national furniture.
In 73, Wales was busy making its own history, demonstrating that Wales was alive. And of course, swinging, a new age of shopping, sipping the new keg beer, and a television revolution. The fun of eating out. In the argument over second homes, people were standing up for Wales by sitting down. And in the mining valleys, struggle and a long road ahead.
To help me navigate the maze of 1973, I'm with novelist Catrin Collier and broadcaster Chris Segar.
Chris comes from Brill, and in 1973 he was a newspaper sub-editor in Nottingham, and when it came to conferences, a persuasive speaker. Catrin was from Pontypridd, a teacher and a youth worker who had moved to Swansea. She'd always wanted to write and set off on that long, hard road of storytelling.
When you look back 40 years on to 1973, what springs immediately to your mind?
Late night parties in the pub after the electricity had been cut off. We used to go to the local, and come about 20 to 10 in the evening, the landlord would start pulling pints and ranging them up on the bar. And at 10 o'clock, my husband, who worked for the local electricity board at the time, would go and turn off the electric because it was rationed. And the party would carry on by candlelight and firelight until about 2 or 3 in the morning.
So you did the best you could in times of emergency, acute economic stress, to somehow get through it.
I don't honestly remember the acute economic stress. I remember petrol going up to 3.11 a gallon, which was horrendous because I used to do a 120-mile round trip to my work. And I remember thinking, if it goes up much further, I'm not going to afford it.
And Chris, what about you? What do you think of when I say 1973?
Well, life was punctuated by parties, and I can remember because I left Nottingham, where I was working in the first part of 73, to come back to Wales, and I worked in Wales later in 73. But the leaving party at Nottingham was absolutely splendid. I returned to Wales, having worked in England for 5 years on the newspapers, and I came back to a Wales that was different and interesting.
Think of a supermarket, double it. Add a department store with clothes, furniture, hardware, refrigerators and television sets, all self-service. Then add restaurants and a snack bar and car parking for 960 cars. And you've some idea of Britain's first hypermarket.
It opened in 72, and in 1973, its sheer gigantic size was still amazing people. It was as if it was planted by a flying saucer. A place of plenty. It made minds boggle.
Do you think you'll be trying out the new hypermarket?
Oh yes, certainly.
Do you think it's going to do a lot of damage to the shops here?
Well, there'll be a fair amount of competition, I should imagine.
We're doing a good thing going there, but it doesn't do all these little shops out of business.
Because some people will keep on coming here.
Yeah, they keep coming, because other people is coming from different towns shopping here, and they're definitely going to go into other shops before they go down there. Into Woolworths and the market and things like that.
Do you think there's room for both kinds?
Oh yes, yes, definitely.
Thank you very much.
I can remember going to Carrefours, and I can remember my parents were from Pontypridd, and although we'd moved to Swansea, it really was a trip for everybody from Swansea and the valleys. And to go into somewhere that size that sold absolutely everything is like shopping heaven.
What do you think about it now? Tell me what you said.
Well, we came with some friends. We haven't seen them since. We walked in with them and we've lost. They're in and out the counters and we've missed them somewhere. We've got to go look for them now.
What do you think of it? Do you think it's confusing?
Well, I've been to France. I know the sort of setup. But I can quite see that if you've never been in a place like this before, you don't know which way to go. The aisles I find are a bit confusing. You can't always get near the counters.
You thought the future had arrived here in Wales?
Absolutely. I never thought that 40 years on we'd be sitting in front of our computers filling baskets with virtual goods, waiting for them to be delivered a couple of days later.
But it was a time of great change, wasn't it? The shops brought all sorts of things, not least frozen foods. That was big then, wasn't it?
I can remember splashing out. Both of us were working. It was the last year before we had children, and I gave up work, and I can remember splashing out over a month's salary on a fridge freezer, and that was tremendous. The idea of just opening a freezer and taking out your whatever you were going to eat that night for supper was fantastic.
Well, I lived in Caerphilly, and Carrefour was a local shop, and splendid it was for all the things you get. I was into cooking at home better curries than you could get in a takeaway. And I realised by reading Madhu Jaffrey and others that, you know, it wasn't very hard. As long as you got the right ingredients, and by then you could find, you know, there were Indian shops, so, you know, grocers where you could get good stuff.
In any case, the curry houses of Britain and the Chinese takeaways had already outstripped the old-fashioned fish and chip shop.
Oh, yeah, they were everywhere. Chinese and Indian was already the big thing to eat.
In 1973, more people than ever were buying their own homes. There was a boom in brand new houses. The average price of a house was under £10,000, and 2/3 of homes had washing machines. And there was still something left over to pay for a night out.
But we knew that we were having it better, really, than our parents had had.
Very much so. Thinking about my parents and how they struggled. My father was a factory worker. My mother was a translator in an office. They had a council flat, and I can remember the day we moved in was a huge day. We actually had a flat with an indoor bathroom. And the pride that everybody took in those council flats the day they moved in. It was an incredible time, and they were having it better than their parents.
Yes.
And I had a car. You know, my parents never had a car. I had a lovely little orange Beetle, which I bought new. I had a home, my own home. You know, here, 2 kids, but I had money in the pocket. There was money. Yeah. I didn't feel I wanted for anything.
Not only did we have things better than our parents, I think we felt that our children too were going to have things better than us.
I think so. I think that we thought the next generation were going to do much better than us again in education, in houses, material possessions, everything. We thought that the bubble would never burst.
By 1973, television had almost completed its conquest of the family home. 9 homes out of 10 had the screen in the corner, and colour was on the march.
We only had 3 channels in 1973.
Yes, 3 channels, all black and white.
Oh no, they were colour.
Well, but colour was good. In 1971 or 2, there were under 2% of TV sets were
We bought
colour.
our first colour set in 1973, and we watched it in black and white for 6 months.
Yeah, a lot of people did that. A lot of people did that.
We just
But
couldn't get used to it.
Don't you think that in many ways, just the 3 channels, American laughed at that, they had 300, that television was very, very good?
Oh yeah, because it was a common experience. And you just knew that if you watched the programme, so did your neighbour, and so did the person you met at work.
And you could talk about it the following day.
And let's face it, they were brilliant programmes. They were the landmark programmes in those days. And I can remember we had a Hitachi set which had 4 buttons, so I thought, well, let's hope for the future that they'd made provision for a 4th.
Llandarcy today is a village haunted by fear. Fear that a maniac strangler who's already struck twice, perhaps 3 times, could strike again.
Sandra Newton, Geraldine Hughes, Pauline Floyd, all 16. It would be 29 years before the killer was identified in his grave by DNA.
I remember the Sanderson Murders. They absolutely rocked Swansea. But it was something that was just so horrific. It went into the psyche of everybody who heard about it, I think.
And very much part of the newspaper world too.
It was a running story. When I first started on the Western Mail that autumn, that was the big running story, and there was a new development every day, and there was... I mean, people were perplexed because it seemed insoluble. They were getting so much information and getting nowhere, and it ran and ran and ran. And this was a baffling murder, and of course remained so for many years until later, through new techniques, it was solved.
Everyone feels smirched.
Yeah, that it could have happened, and it could have happened here, and it obviously did, because, well, as we know, we have communities, but the communities harbour monsters at
I
that
hardly
time.
ever saw any hitchhikers on that road out of Swansea for considerable...
And we used to hitchhike, didn't we, before?
Yeah.
And it was events like that stopped hitchhiking.
In 1973, this quite clunky calculator was the bee's knees. We'll have a look at it again after the break. In 1973, this was the latest, a calculator that spelt the end of counting on your fingers and the end of mental arithmetic, really. Chris, did you have one of those?
We had one made by Pi, and it was slightly bigger and had green lights, not red ones. And I can remember when I took it home, and it was a large black and white box, and it was a bit bigger than this. And I sat down with the kids, and we did sums for fun. Imagine that. His dad with new present kids, let's do sums.
What did you think of it?
I thought it was going to spell the end of brain power and children doing mental arithmetic. I really did. And I can remember the argument about whether or not they were going to be allowed in classrooms.
What did you feel that's not such a good thing?
Given my ability in maths, it was brilliant, personally.
What were you using to teach? What materials?
Chalk, blackboard.
Chalk and blackboard.
Whiteboards were just coming in.
And on a newspaper, everything was typed, and as subs, to prepare the paper, we were armed with pots of glue and pencils and rulers, and you had to tear things up and stick them up, and send them down a tube to men downstairs who set them on linotypes into hot metal and made up pages, And now, on my computer at home on the desk, I can do more in terms of variety of type, colour and picture than you could with an entire building with 300 people there.
I have got a book at home, the Ladybird Book of Computers that was printed in 1970, which is fascinating. Yeah, you need huge buildings.
Yeah, they took up whole rooms. Yeah, I mean, we knew there were computers, but there were these sort of massive things with great tapes and hummed, and men in white coats walked around them. But the idea of the computers being here, or even more importantly, I got one in my pocket in my coat, which is even smaller than this, and does more probably than that big thing in a room did then.
Did you ever think at the time that this would be the forerunner of the world of computers? Did you imagine?
No, it was beyond my imagination. I had no concept of what it would lead to.
I think at that stage I just began to write and sell articles, and I really, really wanted a dedicated word processor. Something that I could write on screen and delete it and get it absolutely right before I printed it out.
Really,
I think I imagined the word processor I wanted long before it appeared.
I wouldn't have recognised the term. I really had no concept of that future ahead in 73.
No. There was simply no vocabulary.
No.
There was, however, the new vocabulary of protest, the Welsh Language Society occupying holiday homes, symptom of cultural anxiety, and the younger generation doing something about it. For Chris Segar, returning to Wales to live, it was significant.
Well, it was a Wales with a new consciousness, and you could see that Wales was somehow standing on its feet and beginning to say, we are Wales. Not in the way that in the 60s, what we called the Welsh Nats, the Welsh language identity applied Cymru was there, and they were looked as fringe. By 73, coming back to Wales, you could feel that Wales was rippling its muscles in all kinds of ways.
At the heart of the campaign was a belief that both of the languages of Wales should have their place together in the public eye.
If they want it, well, that's it. they're entitled to it. But I mean, from my view of it, I think it's a wrong move, and I think there'll be a lot of accidents.
Do you think it could be a tourist attraction? This is one idea that's been put forward.
Yes, I think it could definitely. It is interesting to see the Welsh language.
Well, after all, it is Wales, and after all, we should have a science of our own. At least I think so, anyway.
Wales itself was becoming Welsher in many ways, wasn't it? The previous year, bilingual signs had been okayed by the government. They were on their way. And everything has become more bilingual in a very peaceful kind of way. Do you think that's made Wales more comfortable, more interesting?
I think they're tolerated more, but they were resisted. They were laughed at. They were objected to by a large number of people. But maybe just long exposures made us used to them. I don't think they were happily accepted at first by
not everywhere. And I can remember some people really objecting to the Welsh names. A lot of people in Tenby couldn't understand Dimloch a Pysgod and that sort of thing. But I think they were vociferous, but it soon died down.
Or Barry, which still persists, which is ridiculous. Why not just settle on one? What we've seen, certainly since, and maybe in 73 was the start with the acceptance of bilingual signs, is, I mean, the use of the Welsh dragon far more widely, whereas it had been associated before with the nationalist cause and being seen as divisive. It's now seen more generally. And I think one of the key events in Wales of 1973 was the recording by Max Boyce of Live at Treorchy. And this became a huge hit. 40 years on, they're singing hymns and arias. It's become a hymn for the crowd in the Millennium Stadium. Max Boyce recorded that in 73, and with his clownish performance and his outsized leak, he brought the symbols of Welsh nationalism to the broad mass of Welsh people, and it's carried on. I think he did more for the cause than many might think.
Some limped back, others had to be carried, but finally they were coming home. America's long-suffering prisoners of war, wan and weary and wanted.
The war in Vietnam was always in the news, constantly on television. In 1973, it was clear it was coming to an end.
How they were wanted.
The Vietnam War, I think, I've always been extremely interested in because I did a student exchange from Swansea College in '68 and found myself spending 4 months of the summer on Cape Cod in Massachusetts in a place called Hyannisport, and we couldn't understand why we had so many virtually shell-shocked, drunk troops coming in, but they used to fly them in from Vietnam for R&R. And I started talking to some of those boys and listening to what they'd been through. I went on a couple of the anti-Vietnam War marches and a couple of the civil rights marches. And I really felt at that time that we were changing the world. But yet, from 68 to 73, 5 years before America pulled out of that war.
75 they pulled out, didn't they? When the last helicopter took off from the embassy. With all the people clutching, it was 2 years to come. But by 73...
It was over.
By 73, we knew that the hairy ones, like me, with my hair down here, we knew we were winning. The public opinion and the counterculture was winning the war of words, and we knew we were going to win in Vietnam, and we did.
Meanwhile, war in the Middle East.
Rebounding from their initial shock, the Israelis unleash a savage counterattack as one of history's most violent tank battles is joined.
The big thing, of course, was the Yom Kippur War, because I think of all the events in 73, that was the one that was the decisive event. And I can remember writing the front page headline on the Western Mail when the peace treaty was signed, and the headline was "The Road to Peace from Sign 101," because I think that's where it was, where they'd actually reached in the desert, you know. But then, what happened? We saw the rise in power of the oil-producing nations. OPEC, the producers, raised the price of petrol by 4 times. Sheikh Yamani or your life, came on the scene, and we felt they were holding the West to ransom. And I know that I was issued, as with other drivers with a 311 petrol, a form to prepare for rationing. And the ration cards were printed. They were here in Cardiff, in the government office at Tynyshen. 2 floors were full of pre-printed ration coupons, ready for issue. It never came to that. But it felt that autumn that, you know, we were on the brink of petrol rationing. Now unthinkable in a way, but we were preparing to, you know...
My husband actually got them. He actually got the coupons, and they were wartime ones that had been left over.
That's right, little stamp thing.
Yeah.
We were on the brink of petrol rationing.
So, acute economic crisis cast its shadow on 73. A state of emergency, a 3-day working week, and more pit closures, foreshadowing the last years of coal, the ending of a history.
I was working in the Avon Valley at that time, and the pits closed even before 73. And the people that were left were the people who found it very difficult to get work anywhere else. And the whole valley became totally depressed as a result, which made it very difficult for us working in the comprehensive school, because we found ourselves encouraging the children to look outside the area simply because there was nothing in the area for them. And that was quite heartbreaking, because it was a very strong community, and in some ways I think it still is, like the Rhondda.
Those are the rumblings, because inflation was about to go, largely due to the effects of the Yom Kippur War, and we were about to set the tone for those years of discontent. It was a knife edge in many ways. 73 was a tormented year in some ways. But we did party, but you know, we knew how to party. We did.
I think that the way to round things off now is to have something that evokes 1973. And to my mind, that must be a Black Forest gatto.
Will you be mother?
Of course.
Or will you? I'll be mother. I'll be mother. Would you like a modest slice, Catrin?
A modest slice? That's not modest.
Is it on paper at the bottom? I don't know if I can get it out.
Well, here's to 1973. It really is the taste of the time.
Next time, we're all at sea.